Hello everyone, welcome to yet another day in the clown decade. The decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better, and the decade that is going to
make me lose my marbles!
Because there are things that, even in The Spectator, they had to write a four-letter word beginning with F 3 times in an article to describe the situation that we have with China. What we have going on at the moment is basically practically an open Chinese network within our security service, within our government, and not just this government, previous ones from the looks of it, that effectively make us a third world nation. We are effectively, in China's eyes, on the same level as failed African states that are effectively running as a Chinese vassal. We have that pretty much now. Just for a quick catch-up on people who don't know about the recent shenanigans that comes to the government. Basically, there were two people. One, I believe, was some sort of advisor. I can't remember who the other one was. I covered it in the video on Monday. And effectively, they were taking information from ministers, other special advisors, and things like that. It wasn't classified documentation, it was sensitive information, and passing it over to a Chinese agent. And according to the Official Secrets Act, that's the act, they could not be done under it because China is not considered a threat, which is already ridiculous, because why would you write a law that says, oh, they have to be considered a threat first, rather than just passing it to any other nation? You know, they're official secrets, they're sensitive information. Passing it to America even should get you done under that law, but we have crazy laws that protect you from that. All the government had to do was pass over evidence to say China was a threat when these crimes were being committed. Well, they're not crimes because they've been found innocent because the case collapsed. The government dragged its feet, has been pointing to absolutely everyone else, as we'll go through. They're trying to say, actually, ministers had absolutely nothing to do with this. The whole thing's just crazy and complete banana republic stuff. Well, this is how politicians in PMQs decide to argue about it.
Exactly as I expected, the Prime Minister had to be dragged out at the top of PMQs to give a statement that answers no questions. I don't know what they're laughing. I don't know what they're laughing at. We are talking about the security of this Parliament. He had to be dragged out to repeat only more obfuscation. It is simply unbelievable.
I'm totally with Kemi Badenoch here, by the way. It is absolutely true that Labour have done nothing close to what they need to put this situation to bed and hang out all the dirty laundry in the open. The problem is that as soon as you do that, frankly, I think the whole government's going to collapse with how deep the rot goes, and we'll go into that. But obviously the thing is, this is the problem with the Uniparty. What Starmer effectively answers to this question is effectively, well, actually, the Tories were involved too.
The substantive evidence was provided in 2023 by the previous government. That is when the witness statement was submitted. I am going to disclose it. They will all be able to read it. The substantive evidence was written and disclosed and submitted in 2023 under the last government.
And that's not just the end of it, by the way, because this is an issue with the Uniparty. Whoever's in government would be holding this line, as Keir Starmer himself makes that point.
Mr. Speaker, she questions what's in the review, the refreshed review in 2021 and 2023. Let me be clear. The then Foreign Secretary, sitting, I think, over here, the Honourable Member for Braintree, 1 month after the arrest, so absolutely the relevant time, gave a speech at Mansion House. It was called Our Position on China, setting out the government's policy. He said in that speech, summing up China as a threat in one word would be, his words, impossible, impractical, and most importantly, unwise.
Yep, Foreign Secretary at the time, James Cleverly, he shouldn't have anything wrong with this case. It's wrong to call it a threat, according to him.
The leader of the opposition was Business Secretary at the time. In September 23, the leader of the opposition said, her words, September 23, the relevant year, her words, we should certainly not be describing China as a foe. It's worth looking up the word foe in the dictionary, Mr. Speaker. She went, Mr. Speaker, it doesn't end there, Mr. Speaker. In September 2024, the leader of the opposition said this, I quote, I have shied away from calling China a threat. She is playing politics with national security.
Both are as bad as each other. I mean, that's not actually necessarily true. Labour are obviously worse, but when it comes to this story specifically, I don't think you could have a better reason than to basically have both parties be co-signed to the dustbin of history. Forget being a vassal state of the United States of America. That's obviously preferable to being a secretive vassal state to China. And things get worse, by the way. Pippa Crerar, the political editor of The Guardian, said, Number 10 says, Prime Minister was told that China's spy case was in danger of collapsing a couple of days before it happened. They said it would have been inappropriate for the PM to intervene in evidence process since civil service decided it should be done independently of ministers and SPADs. Tories, however, appear to be suggesting that given allegations involve spying on MPs, special circumstances should have been applied. Of course they should have been, but let's face it, the Tories would have done the same thing in power. Because ultimately, what are their incentives? Make the economy look good. They're so focused on the economy and Chinese investment from there that they're willing to kowtow to them and act like a banana republic. That's exactly what's happening. Another important point to make is that Starmer likely misled the Houses of Parliament, which, given that Boris Johnson was kicked out because of a cake incident, this Chinese spying case could be a hell of a lot worse. Starmer said yes when asked, is the government saying that only one man, the DNSA, had anything to do with this, that being the Deputy National Security Advisor? Is he seriously saying that the Deputy didn't discuss the National Security Advisor, Home Secretary, or anyone in the, I guess, DS's Defence Service? That is actually extremely unlikely, and Starmer will need to quit if he's wrong, as he will have misled the Commons. Lobby, etc. Strategists concentrate on that bit hard. This is a terribly written tweet. I don't know why it's so terribly written. The guy's a checkmark. But basically, if Starmer is saying that this whole we are dragging our feet because we can't give evidence for this case to help China was entirely done by a Deputy National Security Advisor, I mean, that's just implausible. There's no way that happened. So Starmer is effectively trying to jump from one excuse to another. Dan Hodges shows the contradiction the best in a little Twitter thread of his. So this is where we are this morning. Starmer's position literally is Matthew Collins was asked to provide additional evidence on the China threat by the CPS. That's the Deputy Advisor. Collins failed to discuss with either his boss or ministers, somehow. Collins unilaterally cut and pasted the government's position from the Labour manifesto, again without any discussion with his boss or ministers. The Crown Prosecution Service informed him they remained 5% short of the evidential threshold and needed new evidence, which obviously he would have, and the whole department would have actually. Collins took the decision not to provide the additional evidence, collapsing one of the most important espionage cases since the end of the Cold War, and again he did so without any consultation with his boss or ministers. Keir Starmer was told of the impending collapse of the case 2 days before it was announced by the CPS. He didn't ask why it had collapsed, he didn't ask if anything could have been done to stop its collapse, he didn't even ask to see the witness statement that had precipitated that collapse. As I wrote this morning, this whole story is quite clearly a barefaced lie. It's so manifestly untrue, I'm genuinely amazed Starmer is daring to even try and peddle it. This is the equivalent of trying to throw your grandmother under the bus when you have basically every CCTV camera on you and your grandmother at the time. This is how stupid that is. But I'm genuinely at the point where I think Starmer's just coasting through being a Prime Minister. He went to Egypt the other day despite having absolutely nothing to do with the peace agreement in Gaza. Why was that? Because he wants to avoid all this. There's better news abroad. He can be with his friend Donald Trump, who seems to like him for some strange reason. And he'd unironically rather be spending time with Trump, who mocks him in front of the world, than being over here in Britain, where he is basically looking at possibly the last days of his time as Prime Minister. The problem is, who do you replace him with? This is unironically probably better than anyone else in Labour who could grab the keys to number 10. This is why I'm losing my marbles. But anyway, due to all this pressure on this case, the government had to publish the witness statements that weren't passed over as evidence. Your main takeaway from that comes from Calgie, who said, FYI, according to the government, the second witness statement has the date wrong. It was submitted in February 2025, not 2024, meaning it was also submitted under the Labour government, which gives me massive faith in the wider accuracy and quality of the witness statements. He goes on to say, and I'm so mad about this that I'm going to forego my censorship that I usually do, this government may have fucked up admitting this dating error. Basically, it reveals that Starmer's government were the only ones in the witness statement to say that the government was committed to pursuing positive economic relationship with China. In other words, while it was true that obviously James Cleverly and Kemi Badenoch were outwardly saying they don't want to call China a threat, it's actually only the Labour government within witness statements who have actually tried to openly say that they are pursuing a positive economic relationship with China in private matters rather than just in public, making Labour slightly worse, but still both terrible. Anyway, in the court case, it turned out that the two men accused of spying for China acted in a way that was dangerous for the safety and interests of the United Kingdom, a senior government official has told the prosecutors. Wow, no way. I could have told you that. In a series of statements given to the spy trial and released on Wednesday, Matthew Collins, Deputy National Security Advisor, warned that China posed a threat to our people, prosperity and security. He outlined the case against Christopher Cash, 30, and Christopher Berry, 33. The Crown Prosecution Service dropped the charges against the two men last month. They deny any wrongdoing. Cash said the decision to publish details of the prosecution case when he had not had the opportunity to defend himself left him in an impossible position. The government statement, however, is likely to intensify questions among MPs about why the prosecution did not go ahead given the extensive details about the allegations. Well, it's because Matthew Collins, despite apparently saying China was a threat during the trial, was happy to just not give evidence about that to the trial. This is how ridiculous this gets. So the CPS dropped the case against Cash and Berry after Collins refrained from describing China as a threat to national security, despite the fact that he literally did. We literally just read that. He said it multiple times. He called it a threat to our people, prosperity and security. So I don't know what the hell is going on there. He said, however, that the large-scale espionage operations pose a threat to Britain's economic prosperity, resilience and integrity toward democratic institutions. My mind's blown. He's happy to say that, but not give evidence on it, because at the end of the day, everyone is pressuring everyone else in the civil service to possibly even MPs who have Chinese sympathies. They want all of this Chinese investment because effectively it makes the Treasury happy, and they effectively are the money purse of the government, and they decide where money goes. Oh, you helped us with that China thing? Yeah, there you go, MOD. Have some more of our coins. This is ridiculous. He pointed to serious hacking operations by Beijing. Sir Keir Starmer is also likely to face questions over his repeated insistence that Collins' evidence related to previous Conservative government, which, as we saw from Calgi, that isn't even true, because it was published in 2025, and Labour got the date wrong. Whether they meant to do that or not, we don't know. Two witness statements said that the CPS in February and August this year highlight Labour's approach to China and the positive economic benefits it hopes to secure. And that's what it comes down to. Why can't we call China a threat? Because Labour want the money, because it will help with the economic outcomes. And at the end of the day, if people see good headlines about the economy, they think they'll be happy. When in reality, it now costs £1.50 to get 10 slices of cheese. It was £1 a year ago. And it was 50p 2 years before that. Moving on to Dominic Cummings' statements, because he always says this. China obtained vast amounts of classified government information over a period of many years by compromising a network used to transfer data across Whitehall. He said he was warned at the time that disclosing some specific details of the breach would be a criminal offence. He claimed that the breach included some strap material, which the government's term for the highest level of classified information. The breach, which was confirmed by two other senior Whitehall sources, was said to have been connected to a Chinese-owned company involved in Britain's critical national infrastructure. Tom Tugendhat, former Tory security minister, supported Cummings' account. Incredible. Yeah, we had a colossal mishap where China got a whole bunch of classified information from us. And that's not even front-page news, by the way. This is the worst espionage case that we have had, and the largest amount of non-military attacks that we have endured, and nobody seems to care. This is what I mean. We're just a vassal state that's being torn between America and China from the looks of it. People will look back on this and see that this was a Cold War, and that is what we are living through, and literally no one we voted in seems to care. Of all people mentioned so far within this article, Dominic Cummings is the only person who cares. And everyone else will have just been, well, China got our stuff, so we'll put a super injunction in. That's what the criminal offence means, by the way. You remember the 10,000 Afghans coming over in secret, and Robert Jenrick hid that from us along with everyone else? Yeah, that's because of a super injunction. You have parliamentary privilege, by the way, to state that these things are happening. Do any of the MPs do it? No. Because the Tories are trying to save their own skin, and nobody would vote for them if they knew they were trying to hide the fact that they can't even defend us from cyber attacks from China. And Cummings does his usual thing of, we're in the number 10 bunker, being informed by senior civil servants that we have to explain something, there has been a serious problem. Obviously, it was explained that they had a massive cyber attack and a load of classified information was stolen. It was so bizarre, not just that Boris, a few people in the room were looking around like this. Am I somehow misunderstanding what he's saying? Because that sounds effing crazy. I censored that one, I suppose. And as Cummings says, that this is typically how it goes. This won't be the only cyber. We will have had plenty of our information stolen because the government is just completely incapable of doing anything remotely competent. And obviously there's going to be plenty of blackmail in there that China's probably using. And the Uniparty's on board with it because at the end of the day they rely on each other to win. And this is why the breakdown of the Uniparty is one of the best things that could happen, because you could see a revolution from this that could make us a serious country again. Because, you know, all this stuff, it doesn't reflect badly on parties like Reform or even the Greens. Though I think the Greens would just open the border to China at that point. And at this point we move on to the Spectator's expose on all this. There's so many stories in this, I'm just going to hyper-focus on the ones that are described, and I mean this as stratospheric fuck-ups, where the most catastrophic breach came when the Chinese purchased a company that controlled a data hub used by Whitehall Department to exchange information, including of highly classified projects, enabling Beijing to steal a goldmine of secret information. And this is what Cummings has just explained as well. A fourth source said extremely sensitive data was transferred between the most sensitive parts of Whitehall through it. Why in God's name would you pay a Chinese company to set that up? What is wrong with you? The Chinese mega embassy that Labour are basically trying to force through, despite the fact that you can't build anything over 2 stories in London, that has a room in the basement, colloquially known as the dungeon, because nobody knows what it is, so they're joking that it's actually a place to torture people, and they are suspecting that it is literally there just to try and dig into the cables that run through London's financial district so that they can siphon data. I'm not even joking. And that is likely to be allowed through. It's madness. The first source calls this episode a stratospheric fuck-up. The breach was so serious that Johnson commissioned a report from Mark Sedwill, who doubled as Cabinet Secretary and National Security Advisor, and the Intelligence Service on how it could have happened. Oh, how could it have happened? We only let a Beijing-based company run our entire data system. I don't understand how Beijing got it. Oh my god. This is what Dominic Cummings, Johnson's former aide, was referring to when he wrote this week, I watched Johnson and Rishi Sunak both mouth, "What the fuck?" and stare around in open-mouthed amazement in 2020 when the Cabinet Secretary explained a truly amazing penetration of critical infrastructure. Cummings said the incident was classified to the max and that no one was fired. He told the podcast host by Dwarkish Patel that it was like a nightmare picture from a sci-fi novel in which it's actually the reality. He added the specifics are also illegal to discuss. That's alright, I don't really care about the details. This is bad enough that I am literally never going to... no, not even that, I'm going to be positive. I am going to vote the people in who are happy to fire the entire civil service. Guess who that is? Anyway, getting back to this embassy, Starmer later boasted about the embassy to Zieta Summit, which is close to constituting a breach of the rules around the quasi-judicial role of ministers in planning cases. In other words, Starmer can't talk about a planning case and say, oh yes, see, we are definitely going to allow that mega embassy in, because obviously it influences the case of the, well, what is effectively a quango that decides on planning. The ruling of the embassy from Rayner's successor Steve Reed could come as soon as Tuesday. I don't think we've had it yet. A former minister said, next Tuesday, sorry, so we've not had it yet. It was always made clear by the Foreign Office and the Treasury it would be very helpful to give the go-ahead. In Whitehall there are fears that Powell, the real Foreign Secretary, will walk. Powell being the National Security Advisor, who is very pro-China, that I went through in the last video. And so him being the real Foreign Secretary is pretty awful. A friend said, frankly, he doesn't need this shit at his age. He has helped keep the US on board with Ukraine, and aspects of the Trump peace deal between Israel and Hamas mirrored the sequencing and language of the Good Friday Agreement in Northern Ireland, which was effectively just a surrender on our part, of which Powell was the architect, so that explains that. A source close to Starmer said that Jonathan is one of the supreme public servants of his generation. The PM is furious about people briefing against Jonathan. Well, he should have got these 2 people put in prison then, shouldn't he? But no, he obviously advised against it. Starmer's problems go beyond Powell, though. The heads of MI5, MI6 and GCHQ are all pissed off that the case has been abandoned. Just this week, the NCSC, which is the body that covers national cybersecurity, revealed that the number of highly significant cyber attacks, those impacting government essential services, large chunks of the population or the economy, has risen to 12 to 18% in the past year. Sir Ken McCallan, the Director General of MI5, is due to give an annual lecture soon. He won't hold back on the threat that China poses, a senior figure said. I mean, this is how crazy the top level of governments are. You have all these civil servants in the Foreign Office and all these other places basically at war with the Secret Service, the Intelligence Service, the security services, where they're all basically saying, hey, we're getting an awful lot of attacks from China. Can you stop kowtowing to them? And basically everyone else in the rest of government says, no, because we need their money. They're basically being bribed by China. There's no other way to put it. The Americans are also incredulous. When a British MP discussed the case with a senior figure in the Trump administration, his response was, what the fuck is going on? Reports that the US might cut off intelligence sharing over the case are hyperbole. That's bullshit, one official said, but there's a history of tension over the Britain's stance. Of course they're going to cut off intelligence. Why would they trust it? Our Whitehall cyber services are literally run by China. Why the hell would the US give us any information? 3 or 4 years ago, the Americans and Australians thought we weren't taking China seriously enough, said one senior figure in the deep state. Well, this is all confirmed now. Then we published the Integrated Review in 2021, which talked about the Indo-Pacific tilt. We increased our intelligence collection. They said, okay, you guys have finally got it. Well, thank God for that, but look, we still need massive infrastructure changes. It took ages to stop Huawei from being put in our 5G towers. As I say, there's basically a civil war going on in the civil service, where basically half are a part of the Chinese network and the other half know that they're part of the Chinese network. They can't do anything, otherwise the whole house of cards collapses. I would actually not be shocked if most people in the intelligence services are basically voting reform for little else other than the fact that reform are going to absolutely decimate the civil service, which is stopping them from doing their job. That's what this sounds like. This is how crazy this is. The thing I find funniest of all of this is that the Speaker of the House, Lindsay Hoyle, seems to be the only man with integrity here, because he has told MPs he wants to pursue a private prosecution against the spy case. It is understood he consulted Lord Hermer, the Attorney General, before the party conference. Hoyle told allies Hermer gave him only tea and comfort, but nothing positive. My suspicion on that is because Lord Hermer is basically a communist and is probably pro-China. So Hoyle's having to consult other lawyers because obviously these men should be absolutely done for the Official Secrets Act. Whatever follows, the entire episode has been farcical reenactment of that old Watergate adage that in government, it's not the crime which kills you but the cover-up. Because this cover-up has been absolutely horrific. And that's not all I wanted to talk about today, by the way. Because while China siphons an awful lot of money from government subsidies and things like that, Rachel Reeves will be raising taxes for the wealthy in next month's budget, as she needs to raise about £40 billion to avoid basically Liz Truss 2.0. And this is all because she is trying her best to avoid raising on the big three, national insurance, VAT, or income tax, which affect basically everyone who works. Which feels like about half the country at this point. But the IFS say that she has a 1 in 3 chance of actually having to do that, which I like those odds, but given this Labour government, yeah, that's probably more of a 100% chance, so dig deep, wage slaves. Anyway, on top of upping taxes, the new Renters' Rights Bill, which was one of Angela Rayner's, main points of policy she wanted pushed forward, Sam Bowman happens to go through the absolute worst part of this. So a tenant under an insured tenancy other than a relative low-cost tenancy may make an application to the appropriate tribunal for the purpose of challenging the rent payable under tenancy. If no application may be made under subsection 1A if the rent payable under the tenancy is pursuant to a previous determination under this section or is more than 6 months have elapsed since the beginning of the tenancy. Okay, so what that basically means is that you can take your landlord to court to dispute the rent that he is charging you if you've not taken him to court before and you are within 6 months of actually getting the tenancy. A tenant under any assured tenancy may make an application to the appropriate tribunal for the purpose of challenging a new rent proposed in a notice under section 13.2 or 13A2. So you re-sign something with your landlord, you can then the next day take him to court and say, I don't actually agree I should pay this much. And then the tribunal basically sets the rent. And as Sam Bowman says, they will be able to challenge their rent at a tribunal within 6 months. That means tribunals will be able to control all market rents, not just rent rises with tenancy. This is straightforward rent control across the entire market. And I don't think I need to tell you that rent control is the number one example of price controls giving you the exact opposite of what you actually wanted. This sort of thing literally makes people homeless. This is going to make landlords not want to rent out to people because it's so high risk. This is a crazy section. And this whole thing basically slipped through the Lords, and it's probably going to get royal assent soon. So not only are your taxes going up, if you're renting, you're basically not going to be able to move. So good luck out there. Anyway, that's renting going to be absolutely awful for people over the next few years. Let's check in on what the energy bosses are saying now.
If we continue on the path that we're on right now, in all likelihood, electricity prices for a typical customer are going to be 20% higher in 4 or 5 years' time than they are now. And that's even if wholesale prices halve. So, you know, we completely support the decarbonisation of electricity. That will begin to bring wholesale prices down. But the non-commodity costs are adding about £300 of pressure onto a typical bill. We've got to do something radical to address that.
Just to translate that for you, wholesale prices pretty much exclusively talking about fossil fuel prices. So even if you halve oil and gas prices, you're still going to be paying double for energy. Why is that? Decarbonisation. What does the representative for Octopus Energy say? Oh, we still want decarbonisation. We fully support it. Do you know why? They get a whole load of subsidies for it. That's why. It's in their economic interest. This is why you have to pray that reform get in, because you will not be having that useless nonsense anymore. People on the side of this are actually likely to face court, basically for lying to everyone about how things were going to go. I still remember covering Red Ed's whole, I will use a company that I own to mark my own homework in government and say, look, this is going to be great for the future. And then I actually looked into it because I'm not lazy, and it turned out that he basically just lied. There was only one situation where Red Ed's idea would have actually caused a slightly better situation than what we have now, which was still one of the worst cases. And that's if Russia decided to attack the whole of Eastern Europe. That was pretty much it. But you have representatives for pretty much every single energy company on the side of this, because they are the 6 that are still running, and they basically all run on subsidies now. Because any profit they make, 75% of it gets taken off. That was supposed to be a temporary measure as well. It was brought in by the Tories, and they never got rid of it. Tories are just as bad.
You know, if I look at the non-commodity costs, policy costs, network costs, then certainly some of the numbers, some of the modelling that we have suggests that you could get to a position by 2030 where if the wholesale price was zero, bills would still be the same as they are today because of the increase in those non-commodity costs. You know, there are things that I think we can do there. We can move some of those non-commodity costs, particularly the legacy policy costs, feed-in tariff, climate change levy, renewable obligations, off the electricity bill. That would help bring bills down.
Eon representative, just saying it out loud. Net stupid zero. All of these costs, completely moronic. Get rid of them. That is what is causing an awful lot of people's prices to go up. But then you've got Red Ed, who's head of all this, saying, actually, I think you'll find it's just the gas prices. He's literally having to be told, or he might not be present at this select committee, I'm not sure, but you literally have all the bosses here saying, please stop with net stupid zero, it's moronic. They basically want reforming, is what they're saying.
The overwhelming evidence that we've received says it's to do with the marginal price. So what would you do about that? And do you agree that it's a problem?
I don't agree with the evidence, to be honest with you. I think that, as Rachel alluded to, what we have in front of us is a system where even if the wholesale price were to halve, as she indicated, the bills will rise.
The private sector is having to tell the public sector, which they rely on, by the way, you are literally killing our companies and you are going to make people energy impoverished. The bills are still rising despite all these promises that they will come down. Save £300 on your bill, that's what we were promised. They're now higher than they were last year. Thanks for that, Red Ed.
The country as a whole at the moment is paying over £20 billion a year on their electricity bills for policy costs. Now, The projections are that that is going to increase. That is one of the £100 that is possibly going to be added to bills on the current trajectory, electricity bills, over the next 4 years. I think it's time we got this burden under control. There's a lot of good stuff being funded in that 20 billion. But the reality is that it is added to incrementally, piece by piece. Department over here puts in a subsidy for new nuclear. Department over there puts in a subsidy for CCS. There is no budgetary control of this, and yet it all ends up on household bills or in contributing to making our electricity some of the most expensive in the industrialised world.
I'll just let that play out. All that really means is that, as you can see, when it comes to paying for your electricity bill, the reason it's so high is basically tax for that money to then be siphoned off to other completely random projects, whether that's carbon capture and storage, which I thought the government was against anyway, nuclear, which I'm fine with, but you don't have to subsidise it. And she's basically trying to really nicely say, yeah, an awful lot of that is wasted, because you can't go to this select committee that made these choices and call them idiots. She's being very diplomatic. Basically, the entire private sector went to the government here in the select committee and begged them to stop impoverishing the people that they rely on for their profit. And obviously, with reform coming up, they feel empowered to make these pleas, because reform are just gonna do it anyway. Thank God for Richard Tice. Anyway, the final thing here, remember the Chagos stuff, how I was crashing out all about that? Remember how I kept saying, oh, it's probably going to be China getting their hands on it and probably had some play in it? Well, no, actually, it's not just China that were a threat, apparently. Mauritius is carving up the Chagos Islands with India. India to help manage vast area of Chagos. Mauritius gives India permission for comms base near Diego Garcia, which is obviously the American base. India also eyeing fish, minerals and hydrocarbon wealth. UK's were paid for fools. We paid for this, by the way. We didn't get any money from this. It's cost us 30-odd billion, while the government were trying to say it was 3 billion. Again, we need to normalise doing politicians up for treason, because I feel like for the past 2 decades, the government has been working against me despite the fact I've voted for them for 14 years. It's no wonder Reform are so high in the polls. It's been colossally bad news for about 5 years at this point. It's no wonder people are so fed up with it. You know, I live and breathe politics as my hobby, so obviously I'm very informed as to why I'm voting Reform. But you've got to realise, most other normies, they don't really see a difference between an awful lot of political parties. They just think, big two, wow, I hate them now. I'm going to vote for one I've not really heard of / Reform. There's a massive move from people who voted SNP simply because they hated Tories and Labour to Reform, because Reform are giving them a positive message that they aren't going to ruin their country like the SNP have. It's crazy how normal people vote, genuinely. And so this is why Reform needs to do a damn good job so that people actually feel good about voting for them rather than just being a protest vote, which they've done a decent job at so far, and I hope it continues. But honestly, this Labour government, literally the worst I've ever witnessed. Even going through history, the only one that probably beats it out is Clement Attlee's government, because they were giving state secrets on jet engines and nuclear over to Russia, who was literally an enemy at the time. This whole thing with China, yeah, you've got a network of Chinese spies, that much is pretty much obvious, but I actually think a lot of it's just due to people being completely incompetent. I genuinely think there's a level to it there, whereas with Attlee, can't really say that when he literally gave them this jet engine. Honestly, it's ridiculous. So I think with that, we can put that crash out to bed. I really need something uplifting for tomorrow. But knowing me, I will put myself through the pain of doing more of Jimmy the Giant's absolutely atrocious video. If you enjoyed that, please do subscribe, leave a like and leave a comment. Also, of course, become a channel member or leave super chats and super thanks. Right, in terms of shilling, Wolves of Westminster tomorrow, that's at 5. Laughing at the Guardian on Saturday, that's at 8. Tosh News next Tuesday at 9, and I'm not sure when gaming stream is yet. Right, I think with that, that's everything I had for you for today. Don't forget, videos out as and when I can do them. And with that, thank you all very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.